Spicy Toast Gaming here, and thank you for tuning in to our Vex guide for Path of Champions. If you enjoy the video, like and subscribe, and let's get into it. We're going to start off with a brief overview of the champion, just so you know if this is a champion worth investing your time and resources into. Up first, we have Gloom. Gloom is one of the new mechanics added this expansion, and it's the core to Vex's kit. Unlike Spirit, which is a stackable keyword that grants units 1/1, Gloom is a negative keyword you stack on enemy units, reducing down their stats by 1/1. If the enemy's health reaches 0 from this Gloom, it does actually work to kill that unit. Next up then, we have spells and skills, specifically spells and skills that deal damage. Vex has some inbuilt synergy with those, and so you're really going to want to rely on a lot of those types of cards. Through your different drafting or from rewards, shops, any of those, you're really looking for anyone that has damaging spells and skills. So if you enjoy that sort of Jin Annie playstyle, Vex might work out for you as well. Next up then, we have Control. With all of these spells and skills and Gloom mechanics, you're trying to control the enemy board. So if you enjoy that slower sort of playstyle, Vex again could be right for you. Next up then, we have Removal, and this ties into all of the other points we've made so far. With that Gloom, spells and skills, and control, you're trying to control the enemy board with that Removal, trying to reduce them down with that Gloom to get them to have 0 health and then be removed from the board. So similar to someone like Annie, where you're not just relying on stuns or frostbites, you're actively relying on your removal to control the board. Last up then, we have Slow. Sadly, Vex does have a very slow playstyle, so if you've played someone like Morgana, then you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about here. You can still be very strong, but still just be taking forever to end the game. Unfortunately, Vex isn't as strong as someone like Morgana, not even close, unfortunately, but it is still that sort of playstyle where you're trying to control the board and somewhat struggling to actually close out the games. All right, that's it for this brief overview. Let's hop in game and better showcase some of the points we touched on here. In game now, you see we have Vex at level 30 with 3 stars. Now, Vex, they are a 4-cost 5/4, so a pretty solid stat line. And as you see up here, they are Vandal City as well as Shadow Isles. Now, they do have Fearsome and Attack, grant the strongest enemy Gloom, like we touched on earlier. That gives that enemy -1/1 and can stack, and the level up is you've granted Gloom 5 different times. When they level, they go to a 6/5, and now when an enemy gains Gloom, it gains it again. So this doubles the amount of Gloom enemies get, which can be a very powerful effect. Now the champion spell is Glare, so 2-cost slow, grant a unit Gloom to draw 1. So this is a very solid spell. Not only is it giving an enemy or granting an enemy Gloom, it's also giving you draw. It's pretty cheap, and so this is a very solid card for you to have. Taking a look at the star powers, up first we have Round Start, boost all enemies. So that boost increases allies' stackable positive keywords or enemies' negative stackable keywords. This is a interesting power, because essentially what it's doing is it is going to increase the stacks of Gloom that the enemy has. The issue is, if the enemy does not have any Gloom on them, it essentially does nothing, which is a little rough. This definitely could be better if it just said Round Start, grant Gloom to all enemies. Now, this is the level 3 effect. If you don't have the level 3, you just have the first star, it's just every other round boost all enemies. Now, for the second star power, you have +1 starting mana. Your spells and skills damage enemies in the form of Gloom. Now, this is again a interesting one, because this has a lot of unique interactions. So it goes off of the damage the enemy is going to take. So if the enemy has like Barrier or Tough, that is then reducing down the damage and also reducing down your Gloom. Also, Gloom will trigger any damage effect. So if an enemy has an effect where when they take damage, they increase their power, that is still going to trigger here. Also, some effects like Drain no longer triggers, so you can't actually heal off Drain anymore. It's just going to do that damage and then convert that into Gloom. So you really have to rely on your second star power and some of your effects from your starting deck to apply Gloom to enemies, and then rely on your third star power to be able to increase those stacks. While this is good in theory, definitely a bit of an issue when we take a look at the starting deck. So let's do that right now. So up first, we have Gloom Sprites, 1 cost, 2/4 from that Giant Spell. Strike, grant me impact. Solid card. Since it's getting that impact, it's then a boost target. So if you boost it up, you can increase those stacks as well. Overall, solid 1-drop. Next up, we have Pie Toss. So 1 cost fast, deal 1 to a unit, create a perilous pastry in hand. Also has that hand sensor, grant the top ally in your deck 1/1. Now for the spell it makes, 2 cost slow, although this actually gets increased to burst speed from an upgrade in the champion levels. Anyways, it's deal 1 to anything. So again, you can use these to target enemy units and increase those gloom stacks, or just apply gloom to them at all so that your star powers can then boost them up. Now, this doesn't deal a lot of damage, and you're not getting anything to increase that damage, sadly. This, you can target the enemy nexus, though, if you would like. Next up, we have the Concologist. So 2 cost, 3/2. Play Manifest a spell from your regions that cost 3 or less. It also gets that studded leather. Now, your regions are Shadow Isles and Bandle City, so you might be thinking that this spell, or this unit, is able to give you some good removal spells. Unfortunately, the pool of spells that this is drawing from normally is not able to hit any sort of damaging spells. Like, there's 1 or 2, but the vast majority aren't actually going to be useful to you. So this card doesn't actually help you with your second star power really at all, or at least in most situations. Now, when you're actually going through a match, you can try to get cards from other regions, especially like Piltover and Zon, so that you can increase the odds that this will hit a better spell, but definitely starting out, not that good for you. Next up, we have the Grotesque Gift. So 2 cost, 1/1, but it does have that spirit, so really it's a 2/2. The first time an enemy is summoned, grant it Gloom. This also has that Serrated Dirk for Fearsome. Does actually work out pretty well since you have a lot of fearsome synergies since you're dropping down enemies' attack. So overall, a solid card to put down on your deck and passively give the enemy Gloom. Now, this only goes off once. Next up, though, we have Family Reunion. So a story landmark, 2 cost, slow speed. Does have Elixir of Skill on it, though, so it gives you a little bit of draw. So the first round, you can grant a unit Gloom, so some more Gloom generation, really nice. Next up, grant an ally impact. And then lastly, boost 2 units. So you can either boost up some of your own or boost the enemy units. Next, then we have Allay. So 3 cost, 4/2 because of that pickaxe. Now they have impact and they have a play effect of grant me spirit or grant a unit Gloom. So you can either buff this unit up a little bit and make it a great boost target because it could get spirit and impact, or you can hit an enemy with Gloom. Overall, a very solid card that has a lot of very fun voice lines. Next, we have Beefcake Mayor. So 3 cost, 3/4 because of that ancient coin, and this has spirit and impact. And it has round start, boost me. So a really solid card, especially because it has both spirit and impact, which are the 2 positive stacking keywords. The fact that this can just be sitting on your board in every round, getting more stats and impact, is very nice. Then we have Vex at 4. And then for 6, we have Grim. So 6 cost, 8/4 because of that Colossal Hammer. Fearsome, and then play grant a unit 4 Gloom, which is very solid. Normally, though, when you're playing this, you're going to have Vex on the board and already leveled, and Vex doubles the amount of Gloom you hit enemies with, so really this is often going to deal 8 Gloom. This is a great card and really helps you nuke down enemy targets, so that can be very helpful. Overall, I think the starting deck is pretty solid, except for the fact that it does not work for your star powers, especially your second star power, at all. So main issue here, your spells and skills damage enemies in the form of Gloom. Well, in your starting deck, you don't have any damaging skills. You have a couple that have skills that they can do, but that already applies Gloom naturally. It's not actually doing any damage to the enemy. So skills is out of the way. But what about damaging spells? Well, we have Pie Toss that deals 1 damage and gives you another spell that deals 1 damage. And the Concologist that maybe can generate a spell for you that can help, but normally that's actually not the case. It'll generate a spell, but normally it's one that won't actually be too helpful for you. So you really actually struggle to get a lot of Gloom onto enemy units. Most other control decks have ways to do this passively, like Ashe is able to frostbite a unit at the start of the game, same with Yasuo. There's a lot of effects that just can naturally apply some of your control, and your first and third star power are just boosting enemies. But again, the main issue is if you're struggling to get Gloom on enemy targets, then this star power essentially doesn't do anything at all, which is pretty bad when you're struggling in a match and you know your star powers aren't actually activated or doing anything to help you. So I think this is actually a little bit of an issue. Kind of hope Riot changed this just to Gloom all enemies at round start, because it'd be doing almost the same thing except actually working every single round, and that wouldn't actually be overpowered. Vex could use the help. Let's get into the relics though. So I have used a lot of epic relics on Vex, but let's first talk about the common relics. So Z-Drive prototype, not actually too bad. You really are wanting to get the right powers and cards to help you out. So getting a couple extra rerolls is solid. Normally though, for a common slot, I would go with the Chameleon's Necklace. Now I know I recommend this for a lot of champions, but for Vex, it's especially important. Not only is Vex a solid card, but you really want her on your board and leveled, because then she's doubling all of your Gloom, which is very important. And your champion spell is also very solid, granting enemy Gloom and giving you some extra draw. So getting more copies of Vex really helps you out. So I would definitely go with the Chameleon's Necklace pretty much anytime you're having a common slot open, unless you have like Echoing Spirit. Now the Starchild Staff, also very helpful, especially again for Vex. Vex can really struggle to get going in the early game, and quite often you take a couple hits and pretty much every match you're losing health. And so the Starchild Staff can really help you just stabilize and not actually get to like a boss and be very low on health already. So also quite helpful. Moving on to some other relics, note that ones like Wicked Harvest play deal 3 to all of the units. This isn't actually going to be applying Gloom to the enemies, because this isn't a spell or a skill. So while you might initially think this could be really good, not necessarily if you were trying to apply Gloom to the enemies. Now, Utmost Despair, this might seem really good of play grant enemies Gloom, and while it can be helpful, I think most other rare relics will actually help you a lot more than just hitting the enemies with Gloom once. Because essentially, while this goes off when you play Vex, it's then not doing anything else the rest of the game, and you really want to get a lot more value out of most of your rare relics. So while this is something that was kind of made for Vex, I don't think it's actually as good as it needs to be. Moving on though, we have the Loose Cannon's Payload. Now this is actually really good for Vex. So when I'm summoned, discard your hand and then create that many Pow Pows in hand. So these Pow Pows, 2 cost burst, deal 3 to a unit. Now with Vex, you really struggle to have spells and skills to trigger your second star power. And this is trying to mitigate that by giving you a bunch of these Pow Pows that you can use to apply Gloom to enemies. And remember, when Vex is leveled, she doubles your Gloom. So instead of these just dealing 3, now they're dealing 6 to a unit every time you play these, as long as Vex is on your board and leveled. Now you run out of these fairly quickly, but at least it's giving you some removal to try to help you control the board when you play your Vex. Now with that, Grand General's Counterplan, round start, create a fleeting copy of me in hand. We've been over it a couple times, but the champion spell is very good, so just getting one of these every single round, very solid, and can also work as a bit of a safety net. In case your Vex dies, you then have a fleeting copy you can play again, so pretty solid. Deceiver's Crest, while I like this for some champions, you normally want more than just one of your champion spell. While it is a good champion spell, it's not like Lux's, where playing one is going to completely turn the tide of a match. It's a champion spell you want to play many of, so just getting one that costs 0, not going to be as helpful. So I think in this situation, you want to go for either like the Grand General's Counterplan or Echoing Spirit that we'll get into in a moment. Next up then, we have Riptide Battery, and this is another one that has some potential for Vex, definitely played around with it. So Plunder, play Cannon Barrage a number of times equal to my cost. So Vex costs 4, so it's going to go off 4 times. And this battery counts as a skill, which means this is going to be applying Gloom to your enemies. Now it says deal 2 to a unit. If it's dead or gone, deal 1 to the enemy nexus instead. This is a very easy way to make sure your Vex is leveled when you play her. And then these will start dealing double damage and applying 4 Gloom to an enemy each time it hits them. So this can be pretty good. And a trick you can do if you don't want to worry about that Plunder effect is you could have a Riptide Battery here and then throw on a Gatebreaker, because your relics activate from top to bottom. So you play your Vex, they'll hit the Nexus, triggering that plunder, and so then these will go off. Now there is a bit of an issue with this build, well, a couple issues. For one, it's great at getting rid of the enemy board when you play Vex. However, these target a random enemy, so sometimes you'll hit this and it just won't target the person you need it to target, which can be very frustrating. Also, while this is a very strong play effect and you can often potentially wipe the enemy board, it's normally not actually ending you the game, and normally the enemy can then start stabilizing, and now you essentially don't have any relics that are helping you out anymore. And there is an issue where this only will go off once in a match. So there's currently a bug that's happened to me several times where I'd play my Vex, this would go off and be a wonderful effect. They would kill my Vex, I'd drop another one, and the double batteries wouldn't go off. So for some reason, they maybe only go off once per game, which they don't say that anywhere. That is a bit of an issue with this build, but definitely test this relic out on Vex. It is pretty solid. Moving on though, Luden's Tempest, all of your spells and skills deal 1 extra damage. Not one that I actually normally go for with Vex, because I think most of the other relics have a bit more impact, but increasing all that damage is then also increasing your gloom from those spells and skills, so this is one you could potentially throw on. Next up, we have the Chemtech Duplicator. Now this one is actually pretty good for your Vex. So when you play a spell, if you have 6 or more mana gems, copy it with the same targets. Normally your Vex games are going to the 6 mana and often to 10 mana. They're often very, very long. And so getting all of your spells to go off twice, really good, because you're often really relying on those spells to carry the game for you. So having Chemtech Duplicator, quite solid. And then last up, for the rare relics, we have Archangel Staff and Arcane Comet. So Arcane Comet can be a decent mitigation for Vex. Vex can really struggle to deal with large enemy targets, so being able to have an Arcane Comet that you can just obliterate an enemy unit can help mitigate that. Now it is obviously very expensive, and you don't have a lot of synergies with playing these very expensive spells, but can be a decent solution if you're going into like Lysandra or Aurelian Soul, and you just know your Gloom isn't going to be able to deal with these giant units. This can help you out there. And then also Archangel Staff, round start, refill your spell mana. Since you're having to play so many spells, this definitely can help you out. Now, as far as a rare only relic build, I think this would be pretty solid. So Grand General's Counterplan, you have Vex on your board, and you're getting another card that's giving you some draw every single round, making more Vex in your deck. Pretty solid. Chemtech Duplicator then in Loose Cannon's Payload. This making a bunch of pow pows, so you have some removal spells, and then Chemtech Duplicator making all of your spells be doubled. This can really help you, especially as the game goes later, because like we've talked about, Vex is doubling this damage once she's leveled. So instead of doing 3 damage, this is now dealing 6 damage that's being converted to Gloom. And then with the Chemtech Duplicator going off twice, so now you're playing 1 pow pow and you're dealing 12 damage to the enemy. This can really help you control the board and deal with some of those later game threats. And then while you're discarding your whole hand, and that really can be bad in many situations, since you're making the champion spell every round, you're then getting that extra draw, so you still have more options to help you stabilize and deal with whatever the enemy throws at you. So as far as a rare only relic build, I think this would be pretty solid. And then if you don't have some of these slots, any of these, even individually, are very solid for you to try. Now let's talk about some of the epic relics. So Starforged Gauntlets actually has some potential here for Vex. Since you have that 5 power, you can just throw on a couple stat relics to be able to get up to that Titanic value, so you can get that +1 starting mana. So that is pretty good. You can get Titanic though with just epic relics. So one thing that I've had fun doing is going for Spectral Scissors as well as the Death's Foil. So you're hitting that 8 power, you're Titanic, getting that +1 starting mana. Death's Foil on its own, very good for Vex. Often Vex can struggle to attack because you want to attack, you want to give the strongest enemy Gloom, but especially in the late game, you'll often have units that can just block and kill your Vex. So making sure you can't die or take damage while attacking, really helpful for Vex on its own. Spectral Scissors, also just a solid relic. We're kind of using it just for the stats, but if you get lucky and you get like Stabilize or Shadow Totems, you get 2 copies of your Vex. You can then do the broken combo of having your champion support the ephemeral one, which will then summon another copy of the champion, and it just creates a chain of all of your champion attacking at once, just annihilates the enemy. So if you're like me and you have a lot of epic relics, here is a fun build you can go with. But even individually, Starforge with some common relics, pretty solid to get that Titanic value. Death's Foil on its own, very solid, making sure you can attack safely. Echoing Spirit though is another one that I really like. So game start creates 7 copies of me in your deck, so you're pretty much guaranteeing you're drawing your Vex at the start of the game, and then you're getting a bunch more, so you're getting those champion spells, so these glares. But they're going down in cost by 1 as long as you have your Vex on the board. So now you're having a 1 cost, gloom an enemy, and draw 1. So that is very solid. Also Vex, said it so many times, but they double your glare or they double your gloom when they are leveled. So you always want to have Vex on your board, throwing in a bunch of extra copies, so if your Vex gets taken out, you can then play this one instead, or you have other ones to play. Really solid right here. Now, Fear Cleaving Axe, Spirit and Attack boost all units. This can be solid, but also runs into a bit of an issue that you have with your star powers. Boost isn't applying the Gloom. So if you have the entire enemy board already with Gloom, great. You're boosting all of them, reducing down all of their stats. Fantastic. Issue is, though, you sometimes struggle with getting those Gloom on enemy units at all, so sometimes this won't actually have as much an effect. That being said, though, a lot of your own units do have stuff to boost up. Either they have Spirit, Impact, or both, and then making sure Vex has that Spirit from the Fear Cleaving Axe. It is a good way to scale up your units as well as reduce down the enemy. That being said, though, I don't think it's as good as it is on someone like the new Lux. So solid epic, but if you're trying to buy it just for Vex, maybe don't bother. That's it for relics though. Let's go take a look at what powers, items, and support champions you might want to look out for, and then finish off with ranking the champion. All right, taking a look at powers now. Up first here on the left, one of the core powers for Vex, one that you really want to grab anytime you see it, Bouncing Blade. So round start, create a fleeting Blade's Edge in hand. So that's a fast spell that deals 1 damage to an enemy unit, or well, any unit, but normally you're going to want to target the enemies with it. Great way to just trigger your second star power and consistently apply Gloom to enemy units so that they can get boosted by your other star powers and just keep stacking down. So really great power, definitely one to pick up. Next then we have Slow But Steady. When you play a slow spell, copy it onto the same targets. Now your champion spell for Vex is a slow spell, so getting that doubled is really solid. And quite often some of the spells you're given in shops are also slow spells, like your Existential Dread, which we'll showcase here in a moment. There's just a lot of slow spells for you to pick up with Vex, so this is generally a good one to pick up as well. Next then, here on the right, the best defense. Allies have attack, grow my health to match my power. Now, for Vex's units, most of them have a higher attack stat than a health stat, so being able to try to save your units and essentially heal them every time you're attacking is very beneficial. Moving on then, we have Hold It, round start, stun the strongest enemy. Just having some form of hard CC can be really nice, especially for any units you haven't been able to stack up your Gloom on. So just having this supplement your other control is quite nice. Here in the middle then, Memory Game, round start, create in hand a fleeting copy of the last non-fleeting card you played. So essentially this is a way for you to keep using some of your more overpowered cards, which can be very handy for Vex. Quite often you are relying on getting some very good cards. So being able to play that as the last card in a round and then gain a fleeting copy of it next round to play again can really help you out. So definitely one to look out for. Last up then, Elemental Winds. Your spells and skills deal 2 extra damage. Now note here that this is listed as rare. In game, they actually increased its rarity to epic, but this is another one that really helps you out, just making all of your spells and skills deal extra damage, so they therefore apply even more Gloom. Last up then, as far as powers, Sorcery, round start, refill your spell mana. You're often trying to get a whole bunch of different spells in your deck, and so always having the freedom to play them, really key, and that also ties in with the Spell Slinger right here. Your spells cost 1 less. Same reason why you want to get that Sorcery, just so you can always play your spells and potentially play more spells in a single round. Honestly, getting even both of these together or multiple copies of a Spell Slinger can really help you out, because often in your draft you're trying to get so many spells. Last up then, Trifarian Might. When you summon a 5 or higher power ally, it strikes the weakest enemy. Now, since a lot of your units do have that higher attack stat, you can reliably trigger this with several of your units. So just getting some free removal essentially can really help you control that board, and this is quite a handy power to get. Moving on then to support champions. As always, not an exhaustive list, just some champions I think could help you out and the reasons why they could help you. First up then, we have removal. Anyone else that can help you take out enemy targets or just have some damaging spells to help you apply that gloom can be very helpful for you. Next up then, fearsome. Since you're reducing down enemy units' attack, you'll often be getting them below that fearsome threshold where they can no longer block your fearsome units. So you do have a lot of synergies right there with any fearsome decks you actually see. Now, as for some champions, up first we have Misfortune. Misfortune actually works quite well for being able to just ping the enemy board, get a lot of removal or damage on multiple units, just so you can get that gloom stacking up. Misfortune actually pairs very well with all of her different spells and skills. Then we also have Ezreal. Ezreal comes with multiple removal cards, really works out quite well for you. And then last up, we have Nocturne. Now, while I think spells and skills is a better approach, if you're trying to go for that fearsome playstyle, Nocturne is the perfect champion to pair up with that. Next up then, we have some cards to look out for. So here on the left, Existential Dread. You will see this one fairly often. 4-cost slow, grant enemies gloom. So this just hits the entire enemy board, giving them all those gloom stacks, which is quite nice. Again, if you have your Vex leveled, that gloom is going to be doubled. And if you don't have Vex leveled, this is probably a great way to do it. Also getting that Grifter's deck on there so that once you cast this, you can then start potentially getting more copies of it that you can cast just for 1 mana. Again, a slow spell, so really pairing well with that slow but steady. Next up then, Meteor Showers. Deal 4 to an enemy and 1 to another. Again, great way to get that gloom out there. And since this is dealing damage, if you're playing your Vex, you have her on the board and she's leveled, since she's doubling the amount of gloom, this is essentially doubling the damage of your removal spells. So here, even though it says deal 4 to an enemy and 1 to another, your leveled Vex is actually going to have that do 8 damage or 8 gloom to an enemy and 2 to another. So really solid. And while some of these spells are pretty expensive, normally with Vex your games are going to be going long, and so you will actually end up playing a lot of these slower spells. Next up then, Withering Mist. Drain 2 enemies from 2 units. Now, Drain has a interesting mechanic with your second star power, because that damage is turned into gloom, so it's technically not then going to be draining health from the enemy. So you won't be able to heal your Nexus. Drain effects won't trigger that. So this is more just dealing 2 damage to 2 enemies, and it's going off twice. Then again, if you have your Vex leveled, all of those gloom stacks and all that damage essentially is going to be doubled as well. Then last up, Rising Light. Boost all enemies 3 times. So if you're able to get a bunch of gloom stacks on the enemy board and then you hit this, you're going to be just massively debuffing the entire enemy board, which can really help you out. Last up then, we have the rankings, which is a little bit sad. I really liked Vex. I love the deck. I think the playstyle is cool, but the more I play them, the more I'm disappointed with them and think that they just have too many issues. So unfortunately, before level 20, they're down in the D tier, and after level 20, they're still there, unfortunately. I've tried very hard to make this champion work. I even gave them 3 epic slots and tried out a lot of different builds. Unfortunately, though, none can really mitigate the weaknesses this deck has. So regional rankings, this is a multi-region champ, and I think for both Shadow Isles as well as Bandle City, this is the worst champion for both of them. Now, I know some people really don't like Mordekaiser, so in some people's opinion, Mordekaiser might be worse here, but personally, I would rather play Mordekaiser, and I think he is better than Vex. As far as pros, you have an interesting mechanic. Being able to reduce down all enemy units with this stacking debuff is pretty cool. Being able to really use your damaging spells and essentially get double damage off of them in certain situations where you have Vex leveled, that can be really fun. The cons, though, you are a very slow deck and can really struggle to close out games. And then you also have no hard removal. So while you can get these stacks on enemies, you can really struggle when the enemy drops just a massive unit. And if you're going up against like Aurelion Sol or Lysandra, where they have abilities to double the stats of their units, and so they're dropping ones that might have 10-10, 20-20, or even higher stat lines, your Gloom really struggles to reduce them down, and you don't really have any way to just kill them or frostbite them, stun them. You don't have a way to just remove that threat off the board. And so that's one way that as a control deck, it really struggles to actually perform well, especially in the tougher challenges, which is very disappointing. Overall, though, I do like the champion. I think they have a great starting deck, but not a starting deck necessarily made for their star powers, which is unfortunate. I hope Riot does come and take a look at this champion, because I don't think they are really performing as well as Riot intended. If you end up getting this champion or already have them, though, I hope you enjoy them. While I think there's definitely room for improvement, they are still a fun champion. That's all from me, though. I hope you all have a great day.